So it begins.
Whoever is growing a small patch of cannabis behind the gymnasium, congratulations. You have won a cruise. Report to security to claim your tickets.
Self-awareness is a tricky thing. It can help us understand the world, but it doesn't mean much if it doesn't help us connect with it.
We've been living on the wrong side of the looking glass.
The second episode of a series is a chance for them to break free from the shackles of network executive expectations and become something tangible in the outside world. Every show set in a workplace faces similar challenges. How much actual work should be demonstrated? Law and cop dramas thrive on the trauma of tough cases, but comedies have a trickier balancing act. The Office, for example, had to satirize the workplace without boring us to death with actual paper sales.
I'm boring myself just talking about this.
Parks and Rec had to tackle the chaos of local government without drowning us in red tape.
You from Parks and Rec?
Yeah.
And Community has the same challenge to figure out how to keep the community college bit going without it dropping the premise altogether. Personally, I think that this balance is something the Community wrestled with over time. The community that they built within the walls of this community college is iconic, but let's be honest, setting your show within a 2-year associate's program that comes with community college puts an expiration date baked directly into it. How do these characters stay in a study group when they're all in different classes in the future? What happens if any of them graduate? These are all questions that the show had to grapple with from the moment that they got greenlit. And Dan Harmon's answer?
So don't question Senor Chang, or you'll get bit. You bet. Ya bet.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris and I'm analyzing every episode of The Office. Hey everybody, I'm Chris and I'm analyzing every episode of Community, and today we're looking at Spanish 101.
Días, me gustas papas frías, bigote de la cabra, camarón Díaz. Yeah, boy.
It's like Harmon's strategy was just not given an F.
He don't give an F about nothing.
Instead, he created a world where the rules of reality bend just enough to keep things fresh and relatively unexpected.
Expect the unexpected.
Greendale was never meant to reflect a normal college experience, much like how community college doesn't either.
Ya bet.
It's a quirky and surreal backdrop for the stories that Harmon wanted to tell. Right from the start, Spanish 101 leans into this dreamlike vibe, setting up the characters and stories in a way that feel effortless yet intricately layered. While I doubt that the opening sequence of the Spanish 101 episode is on anybody's top list of favorite sequences of all time, it's Community at its finest. Oddly enough to say that. It's layered, self-referential, and effortlessly smart. Honestly, trying to just describe how good the writing here is in this opening sequence makes me feel like I need to level up my own writing skills.
Say, come on already, move on.
It kicks off with Dean's self-aware announcements, trailing off into absurdity, but setting the tone and starting the pace.
Students suggesting its volume be lowered, while others question its very purpose.
That dude makes a lot of announcements.
I like it. It makes every 10 minutes feel like the beginning of a new scene of a TV show.
Abed's self-awareness is his greatest strength and his most glaring limitation. In this opening sequence, he nails the meta nature of their setup, comparing Dean's announcements and the group's banter to the opening scene of a show. He's so in tune with the structure of the world around him, but all of this awareness comes at a cost. Abed's deep understanding of fictional storytelling blinds him to the nuances of real life. He critiques Britta for spoiling the end of a story,
And the worst part of it is when it's all over.
Spoilers.
he fails to grasp her activism, misguided as it may be, we'll get there in a second, exist in the very real and messy world of geopolitics.
You understand that TV and life are different, right?
For Abed, life is best understood through the lens of storytelling, which leaves him unable to really connect with how others experience and process the complexities of reality.
I believe that as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering.
But then, also in this opening sequence, we come to understand that Britta's brand of activism highlights the gap between awareness and action. She knows about the murders of journalists in Guatemala, and she seems happy to use this knowledge to her advantage in this social situation, but she doesn't have a plan or a solution or even a coherent argument to follow any of this up with. Her awareness is performative, more about asserting her identity as a woke member of the group rather than affecting any actual change. Ironically, Andy and Shirley, who have no prior knowledge of this situation, are immediately gripped by it. Their genuine reaction contrasts Britta's hollow delivery and underscores an important point. Simply being aware of an issue isn't enough. If anything, it actually fosters complacency, creating the illusion of doing something while leaving the real problems unaddressed. All of this, and we're not even like a minute into this episode, Then Jeff walks in late, radiating confidence and charm, perfectly embodying the sitcom archetype of the effortlessly cool protagonist, something I wish I was. His Fonzie-like entrance is a performance, a carefully curated act to disarm the group and keep them from looking too closely at who he really is. For the rest of the group, except Britta, Jeff's swagger is convincing, even endearing.
I just feel like I never have anything to offer.
Britta sees through the facade, recognizing that his tardiness
come on now, don't use that word around, Abed.
Isn't just a quirk, but a calculated move to avoid genuine connection. Jeff's charm is an armor, a way to deflect from his own emptiness, which he even admits in this biting yet self-deprecating remark about his life being emptier than a 3-ring binder. This opening sequence, the very first after the pilot, is Community flexing its audacity right out of the gates. Every character's self-awareness, or lack thereof, collides in a way that both feels chaotic and masterfully orchestrated. Jeff knows exactly how to control the narrative around him, but unlike Abed, who uses his self-awareness to analyze the world, Jeff wields it as a shield, keeping everyone at arm's length. When Britta calls this out, the A-plot takes shape, brilliantly pairing Jeff with the one character who's even less self-aware than he is.
You can have what the kids are calling a sausage fest.
Meanwhile, the B-plot flips that script. Britta claims to see the world for what it is, but lacks the commitment to actually act. While Annie and Shirley, previously unaware of the issue, are immediately fired up to make a difference. All of this layered against the lucid backdrop of Chang's opening monologue, a hilarious yet layered, self-aware rant that both embraces and mocks the stereotypical expectations placed upon him. He fiercely defends his teaching ability, but if we're being honest, like, most people don't need a study group to pass a community college Spanish 101 class. It's not that hard, which I think might be a subtle nod to the idea that Chang might not be a very good Spanish teacher.
I am a Spanish genius!
Which maybe adds another layer of humor and irony to the scene. The act concludes by setting the stage for the B-plot's next steps with an on-campus brownie-fueled rally.
Brownies?
Meanwhile, the A-plot stumbles slightly, in my opinion, with a less than inspired switcheroo. Jeff ends up trading shirts with Abed to be partnered with Britta, only for Britta to swap with Pierce. It's a functional move for the writers, but it doesn't quite live up to the cleverness of this earlier setup. The second act sees Britta struggling with Annie and Shirley's strange but enthusiastic efforts.
You can hang the Chicata Panecas Piñata. You guys realize he was beaten to death, right?
That's where we got the idea from.
But she eventually humbles herself by admitting that she's kind of a poser. For me, it's a moment that resonates with something my college roommate used to say all the time. I like the way I did it more than the way you didn't. I hated when they said that. It's a reminder, though, that we shouldn't be so quick to criticize someone's imperfect attempts to fix a problem, especially when we're not even trying to solve it ourselves.
You sound like Guatemala.
Meanwhile, Jeff gets stuck with Pierce to perform a very simple Spanish dialogue, but they struggle to find their groove, and Harmon wastes no time exploring the group dynamics that will define this series.
Gracias.
Jeff eventually bails on Pierce's overly convoluted plot, possibly a sly dig Harmon was making at someone. It's unclear. In the next scene during the silent protest, Pierce inevitably causes a scene.
Your idea?
The chaos ends up giving Annie and Shirley a sense of accomplishment, resolving their story with a heartfelt but easily missable moment.
Well, it's more than I ever accomplished.
But the real climax of the episode is Jeff's unexpected turnaround.
Conflicts like these will ultimately bring us together as an unlikely family.
Britta has seen through every one of Jeff's moves, calling out his self-centered manipulation of those around him at every step of the way. In response, Jeff leans fully into Pierce's outlandish vision, embracing the chaos. What follows is a surprisingly long montage of their bizarre Spanish presentation set to Amy Mann's Wise Up. Now, the song adds a subtle depth to this montage, appearing in Magnolia. The song is about facing hard truths and taking steps towards change, which feels playfully fitting here. While the scene is undeniably absurd, Jeff and Pierce's over-the-top presentation spiraling into chaos, it also makes a small moment of growth for Jeff. By going all in on Pierce's ridiculous vision, Jeff takes a step towards genuine connection, even if it's with the group's most difficult member. It's wild and weird and quintessentially Community. Then the result is a failing grade for both of them, but somehow that feels like what they earned.
Okay, guys, why are there costumes involved? These are short conversations. They're not supposed to take
Your breath away?
Yet, this act of selflessness manages to chip away at least one layer of Britta's heart.
No, I know. I thought of that. She looked back.
Just remember when Jeff and Britta were the will they, won't they of Community? It was weird times. Let's dive into the deeper meaning.
Emotions!
At its core, Spanish 101 explores the concept of self-awareness, not as a singular idea, but as something that is layered, flawed, and deeply human. Each story arc concludes with a messy and ineffective resolution, and yet it fits perfectly in line with Harmon's story circle. Every character in this episode wrestles with their own version of self-awareness, and I honestly somehow relate to every single one of them. Jeff is the epitome of self-awareness when it comes to manipulating people, at least. He knows how to charm, how to control the narrative, and how to avoid vulnerability. But that kind of self-awareness is hollow, and it hits particularly close to home. Like him, I spent years trying to regulate how others saw me, trying to figure out the right moves, the right words, the right clothes, all of it to navigate the weirdness of all social expectations. It worked on some level, but I always felt as though I was performing, never connecting. Watching Jeff embrace Pierce's chaos, letting go of his carefully curated image, cringes something deep down inside of me, and yet it reminds me of how eventually I realized that people are not a system to be gained, and true relationships only happen when you show up authentically. The resolution of this story arc is messy. It's uncomfortable, and it earns him a failing grade, but it also is the most honest thing that he does, which earns the look back. And then there's Britta, whose self-awareness takes the form of recognizing global injustices. She knows what's happening in Guatemala. She's eager to point it out, but she's not really ready to do anything about it. Her activism is more about defining herself rather than making any actual impact. Ironically, Annie and Shirley, who start the episode completely unaware of the issue, are the ones who take the real action. This contrast highlights a truth we often overlook. Awareness alone doesn't solve problems. It's what we do with that awareness that matters. And the resolution demonstrating silence as an act of protesting, mirroring the silence of Britta's previous actions, seems to be commentary on this entire thing being wholly ineffective and silly to begin with. But that brings us to Abed, which is probably a sentence I'm going to say a lot in this series. Abed's hyper-meta perspective fits into this theme. His ability to see the situation as a TV show's setup is brilliant, but it also keeps people at a distance for him. He's so busy analyzing the world as if it's fiction that he struggles to engage with the emotional realities of the people around him. His self-awareness is sharp, but it's incomplete. Together, these threads remind us that awareness is only the first step. It's important to know who we are. It's important to see the problems that exist in the world around us, but it's more important for us to connect and act. Whether it's through Jeff's reluctant bond with Pierce, Britta's eventual humility, or Annie and Shirley's eagerness to make a difference, this episode shows that self-awareness becomes meaningful when it's paired with action, connection, and a willingness to grow. And that's why Spanish 101 works. It takes something that is seemingly simple as a Spanish class and uses it to explore one of the most complicated aspects of being human. But that's just Community, so let's rate this thing. Spanish 101 gives us early flashes of what makes Community special. Layered, clever writing, and a willingness to lean into the absurd. The opening sequence alone is masterclass in establishing character dynamics while playing with the idea of self-awareness, both as a narrative device and a thematic anchor. Abed's meta-commentary, Jeff's Fonzie entrance, and Britta's fumbling activism are all sharp, funny, and packed with potential. In those moments, this episode feels like a blueprint of the greatness the show will achieve. But as the episode unfolds, some of that promise gets lost. The pacing stumbles with certain scenes like Jeff and Pierce's extended presentation montage dragging on longer than necessary. While it does serve as a character moment for Jeff, the length and absurdity of the scene make it feel very self-indulgent. Similarly, Pierce catching on fire during the silent protest feels less clever and more like an odd misfire. It's a joke that it doesn't really land for me. and it overshadows the sincerity of what's actually happening as the A plot and B plot combine. What holds the episode back, though, is the occasional reliance on shock or chaos for laughs instead of the sharper, more character-driven humor that the series excels at. There's brilliance in how these characters' flaws and strengths bounce off each other, but when the humor veers into this physical comedy or overly zany, it undercuts the emotional beats and clever writing. That said, Spanish 101 does an admirable job of setting the tone for the series. It gives us a deeper glimpse into the group dynamics that will define the show, from Jeff's reluctant growth to Britta's passionate yet ineffective ideals, and Abed's detached meta-awareness. The building blocks are there, it's just unpolished. But just a quick note about my ratings. I started with a baseline of 5 out of 10 for the pilot. From here on, I'm going to judge every episode by how it stacks up against the ones that came before it. This means I'm less concerned with how an episode compares to the best of the series and more just focused on the relative quality in context of the show's progression. Think of it as a running comparison. Each episode earns the score based on whether it feels like a step forward or a step back. That said, for the glimpses of greatness bogged down by some pacing and some poor decisions, I'm going to give Spanish 101 a 6 out of 10. But that's just what I think about this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Got something good? I might call it out in the next episode. Before I dive into some of those comments from last week, I want to take a moment to thank all of these amazing people for supporting the channel. Special thanks to our Dundee's hosts, Amber Piercy, Anna and Dark Lasagna, and our Inner Circle members, Avery, Daniel Roberts, Heidi and the Una, Zach, Valerie, Jackie Estes, Mooch, and Native Penguin. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find the links in the description. Otherwise, just give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Okay, so looking at the comments from the pilot last week, one interesting idea was that Britta's last name, Perry, could be a nod to the swordplay term, Perry, symbolizing her as the yin to Jeff's yang. I only really know Perry as the X button in most Arkham games. It is a cool perspective, and honestly it tracks when you think about how their dynamic develops. Another take was Jeff's pants in the pilot might represent him hitting rock bottom. Considering the pilot is a starting point for everyone's character arcs, this does make a lot of sense. Jeff's fashion could be a subtle clue about just how low he currently is at that moment. I like that. It's also an idea that was shared that each character in the show represents an aspect of Dan Harmon's personality. I think that's really interesting and highlights the layered nature of the writing. It's something worth diving into in later episodes. Somebody else left a comment saying that they had a crush on Annie, comparing it to how I had a crush on Aaron from The Office. I just want to get something out of the way right now. Both Ellie Kemper and Allison Brie are older than me in real life, which means nothing I can say is creepy.
To the irony of that sentence.
Finally, a commenter pointed out that the show's concept reportedly came from Dan Harmon's real life experience taking a Spanish class at a community college, connecting with real people he never really expected to, which is like a really neat detail. But now I'm wondering if my comment about Chang being a bad Spanish teacher might have actually been throwing shade at Harmon's real life teacher. If you're listening, that's my bad. I'm sure you're a great teacher.
Yeah, bet!
But thanks for all your comments. Keep them coming. Your assignment for next week is Introduction to Film.
Day seized!
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.